In this situation, it just says to solve the following equations. So when you're looking at a situation, what you want to do is first look at all terms that are involved. We do have everything set equal to 0. That is definitely the first check mark that we need to have. We need to have everything over to one side. Second of all, especially when you have, in this case, like 4 different terms, you want to think, okay, is there some greatest common factor I could take out of all of these? Well, in these first 3, we have C's, but this last one does not. And we can see that 2c cubed, negative 12c, negative 42, those are all even numbers. We could maybe take out a number, but 7 is a prime odd, and so I really can't take out anything. So when we get to this point, we have to go, okay, I've tried to take out the greatest common factors. I didn't have anything in common, so let's approach it differently. What if we just look at the front 2 terms, see if they have commonality, and then let's look at the back 2 terms and see if they have commonality, and let's see if that takes us to another step where we could work this out. So in the front 2 terms, we're going to look at the coefficients first, 2 and 7, and there's not a factor that will divide both 2 and 7, so we're just going to leave those alone. Then we're going to look at our variables. We see that this has a c cubed and this has a c squared. So when you're factoring out a variable, you take out the smallest of the 2 exponents, and so that would leave me with c squared out front, and then on the inside, 2c cubed. When we take off a c squared, that leaves us with just 1c left over, plus 7, our coefficient. That c squared got moved out front, and that is the greatest common factor between those 2 terms. Now in the back half, we're going to do the same process, and our goal in this same process is hopefully we can create this grouping again for our next step. So if I look at negative 12 and negative 42, I see that the greatest common factor between 12 and 42 is a 6. So I'm going to pull a 6 out front. I look at them, and this one has a C and this one does not, so we're not going to be pulling a variable out. But we are going to pull a negative out, because when I pull a negative 6 out, that leaves me with negative 12 divided by negative 6, which is 2C, plus 7. And the reason we want to take that negative out is now you can see that that parentheses is the same. Now all of this is set equal to 0. That's important when we come down to solve. Now when you're looking at the pieces you have left, and that's a lot of times what you do in math, is you look at the next step. Like, okay, now evaluate this step and see what I have going on. I can see that this grouping and this grouping, these are called terms, they both have this parentheses in common. So that's going to be the greatest common factor that I'm going to pull out front. I'm going to say 2c plus 7. Now what would be left over? If I take this whole grouping and move it out front, I'm left with a c squared. If looking at this second term here, I take this whole grouping out, I'll be left with minus 6. And all this is equal to 0. Now I can apply my 0 property. This times this is equal to 0. So that means I can draw my table and say, well, either 2c plus 7 is equal to 0, and solve for c. So I subtract the 7 over, then divide by 2. So c is equal to negative 7 halves. And then I could say, or c squared minus 6 could give me 0, and I solve for that. So that's c squared equal to 6, square root both sides. So c is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. Now looking backwards, the highest exponent on this was a 3rd power. So I should get 3 answers. And we see that negative 7 halves, positive and negative square root of 6. And so what you would do to list out this answer is you would say c is equal to negative 7 over 2, square root of 6, negative square root of 6. So I hope this helps you as you solve this problem to find all the exact solutions.